Eleanor had lived in her cozy little house on the edge of town for as long as she could remember. It was a peaceful life, quiet and comfortable, with only the company of her books and the occasional neighbor's visit. At the age of 78, she found joy in simple things: her garden, warm tea in the afternoon, and watching the birds through her kitchen window. Her days often passed in a slow, predictable rhythm. It was the kind of life that many might find lonely, but for Eleanor, it was exactly what she wanted. She had no family left, no close friends. She had long ago accepted that solitude was her companion. It was an ordinary afternoon, the kind of gray, rainy day when the world outside felt muffled, as if the whole town was wrapped in a soft blanket. Eleanor sat by the window, the steaming mug of tea cradled in her hands, watching the rain tap against the glass. She loved this weather. It was a comfort to her, calm and predictable. The rain would wash away everything, leaving only the peaceful hum of the world beyond. But today was different. As Eleanor gazed out the window, there was a sudden, unexpected sound, a knock at the door. The noise echoed in the quiet house, startling her. She had not been expecting anyone. It was unusual for anyone to visit her, especially on a rainy day like this. She set her tea aside and slowly stood up, her joints creaking as she moved. With a slight hesitation, she walked to the door, wondering who could be on the other side. When she opened the door, the sight that greeted her was unexpected and puzzling. Two young children stood in the doorway, a boy and a girl. They were both about 8 years old, their small frames soaked by the rain. But they didn't seem to mind. The boy wore a too large jacket that hung loosely over his skinny shoulders, while the girl clutched a ragged umbrella, which did little to protect her from the downpour. Their clothes were a bit dirty, and they both looked at her with wide, curious eyes. For a moment, Eleanor stood there, unsure of what to do. She hadn't seen children in years, and certainly not at her door. The twins didn't seem lost, but their presence was still a mystery. Her heart skipped a beat, a strange feeling settling in her chest. They were so young, yet so determined. "Can we come inside?" the girl asked, her voice soft but clear. Eleanor blinked, surprised by the question. Of course, she wanted to help, but she wasn't sure who they were or why they were here. "Who are you?" she asked gently, a tinge of concern creeping into her voice. The twins exchanged a glance, but neither answered right away. There was something about their gaze that seemed almost knowing. They looked at Eleanor as if they had been searching for her for a long time. "Please," the boy added, his voice trembling slightly. "We've been looking for you." Eleanor's brow furrowed. Looking for her? The words hung in the air, strange and confusing. She stepped aside, motioning for them to come in, unsure of what this encounter meant. They quickly stepped into the warmth of the house, and she closed the door behind them, feeling a knot tighten in her stomach. "Are you hungry?" Eleanor asked, trying to break the silence that had settled between them. The twins nodded, and Eleanor led them to the kitchen. As they sat down at the table, she couldn't help but notice how quiet they were. They didn't seem like ordinary children, and their mysterious presence left Eleanor with more questions than answers. What did they mean by looking for her? And why had they come to her door on this rainy day? As the rain continued to pour outside, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that today would be the start of something she hadn't expected, something that would change her life forever. Eleanor watched as the twins sat quietly at her kitchen table, their small hands folded neatly in front of them. Their silence was unusual for children of their age, and it made the air around them feel heavy, as if they carried something with them that they weren't yet ready to share. The girl, with her bright eyes and pale skin, looked around the room with a kind of curiosity that made Eleanor feel as though she was being observed, not just as a person, but as something more, something important. The boy, shorter and with dark, curly hair, seemed lost in thought, his eyes darting around the room, but never meeting hers. Eleanor busied herself in the kitchen, preparing a small snack for the children. She wasn't sure what to say or ask. A part of her felt uneasy about having them in her home, yet another part of her was drawn to them, almost as if something in her life had suddenly shifted. She set a plate of cookies and milk on the table, watching as the twins glanced at the food, but didn't immediately reach for it. "Please, eat something," Eleanor said softly, hoping to ease the tension. "It's not much, but it's warm." The boy hesitated before taking a cookie, nibbling at it slowly. The girl followed his lead, her eyes never leaving Eleanor. There was something in their gaze, a depth she couldn't place. Eleanor smiled at them, trying to make them feel comfortable, but the silence stretched on. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was more like the calm before a storm, as if something was about to be said that would change everything. Finally, it was the girl who spoke, her voice as soft as a whisper. "You don't remember us, do you?" she asked, her words hanging in the air. Eleanor blinked, confused. "Remember you?" she repeated, her mind racing to place them. She had never seen these children before. "I'm afraid I don't know who you are." The twins exchanged a look, one that only they seemed to understand. The boy shifted in his chair, glancing at his sister before speaking. "We've been looking for you," he said, his voice barely above a murmur. "For a long time." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. "Looking for me?" She felt a wave of confusion flood over her. Who were these children? Why were they looking for her? The girl reached across the table, gently touching her hand. "We need to tell you something," she said, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. Eleanor stared at her, unsure of what was happening. The air between them seemed to thicken, as if the walls of the room were closing in. Her mind raced with questions, but she couldn't find the words to ask. Who were they really? And why had they come to her? The boy cleared his throat, then spoke again, more quietly this time. "We're not just anybody," he said. "We're your family." Eleanor's breath caught in her chest, her heart pounding. Family. How could that be? She had no family left, no children, no grandchildren. She had spent years alone, and now these strangers were telling her they were her family. Her mind tried to make sense of it, but the pieces didn't fit. She looked at them more closely, trying to see beyond their appearances, beyond the tattered clothes and the quiet expressions. Could they really be who they said they were? The girl gave her a small, knowing smile, as if she understood Eleanor's confusion. "It's okay," she said. "You'll remember us. We promise." Eleanor's head spun, her thoughts a whirlwind. She sat back in her chair, staring at the twins, trying to understand what they were telling her. Her heart ached with a strange mix of hope and disbelief. Was it possible? Could they really be her family, after all these years? For the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. The promise of something more, something she couldn't quite grasp yet. She sat there, motionless, as the rain continued to fall outside, washing the world clean, while her life, it seemed, was about to be forever changed. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, her mind racing as she tried to understand what the twins were telling her. The idea that they were somehow connected to her, that they were her family, seemed impossible. She had lived so many years without anyone, without any relatives. The thought of family, after all this time, felt distant, like a dream she had once had, but never thought could come true. The girl, with her wide, curious eyes, was staring at Eleanor now, as if waiting for some sort of reaction. The boy, sitting silently beside her, seemed to have a quiet intensity about him, his gaze focused on the floor as though he was deep in thought. Eleanor couldn't help but feel a sense of unease mixed with curiosity. "You're my family?" Eleanor asked, her voice shaking slightly. She almost couldn't believe the words coming out of her own mouth. "But I don't understand. I've been alone for so long. How could you be my family?" The girl reached out gently, her small hand resting on Eleanor's. "It's true," she said softly, her voice steady. "We've been looking for you for a long time. Our mom, she used to live with you." The words hit Eleanor like a sudden gust of wind, and she felt a cold shiver run through her. her mom. She had taken in many children over the years, but she had never heard from any of them again. The memories of those years were a blur, and she had often wondered what had happened to the young girl she had once cared for. The boy looked up then, meeting Eleanor's eyes for the first time. There was a strange mixture of sadness and hope in his gaze. "We came to find you because she told us about you. She said you were the only one who could help us." Eleanor blinked, trying to process the information. "Who is she?" "The woman you're talking about. Who was she to me?" The girl seemed to hesitate for a moment, her lips pressing together as if she was weighing her words. Finally, she spoke again, her voice quieter this time. "She was your daughter, Eleanor. The daughter you never knew you had." The shock that coursed through Eleanor's body felt almost physical. She felt her breath catch in her throat. Her daughter. The word echoed in her mind. But Eleanor had never had a daughter. She had never given birth to anyone. The thought seemed impossible. How could these children claim to be her grandchildren if she had never even had a child? "You must be mistaken," Eleanor said, her voice trembling as confusion and doubt flooded her. I never had a daughter. You've made a mistake. I don't have any children." The boy shook his head slowly. "It's not a mistake, ma'am," he said quietly. "Our mother was your foster daughter. She came to you when she was just a little girl. You took care of her, but she left. We think she left because she didn't want you to know about us. She didn't want you to know we existed." Eleanor's heart was pounding in her chest as the boy's words sank in. A foster daughter. Yes, she remembered now. She had taken in a troubled girl when she was young, a girl who had run away from a difficult home life. She had tried to give the girl a better life, but after a while, the girl had disappeared, leaving Eleanor with nothing but memories. The years had passed, and Eleanor had never known what had happened to her. Tears welled up in Eleanor's eyes as the weight of the realization hit her. She had lost contact with the girl she had cared for. And now, decades later, the girl's children were standing in her kitchen, looking at her with wide eyes full of hope. "You're really her children," Eleanor whispered, more to herself than to them. Her hands trembled as she reached for her cup of tea, though her throat felt tight. How is this possible?" The girl nodded, her eyes soft but serious. "We've been searching for you, because she told us you were the only one who could help us. We don't know what to do, but we know we need you." Eleanor's mind spun with a million questions, but the one thing that stood out the most was the overwhelming sense that something had been waiting for her all these years. These children, these strangers who somehow felt like they weren't strangers at all, were now part of her life. It was as if the past and the present had collided, and she was left to pick up the pieces. As Eleanor looked at the twins, she realized that her world had just been turned upside down, and that there was no going back. The truth was more than she had ever expected, and now she had to find a way to understand it. Eleanor sat in stunned silence, trying to piece together the flood of information the twins had just given her. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and memories, none of which seemed to fit together the way they should. A foster daughter, a girl she had loved and cared for, had somehow vanished from her life. And now, decades later, her children were standing in her kitchen, asking for help. It felt like a dream, a strange, impossible dream that she couldn't wake up from. The twins were still sitting across from her, their eyes full of anticipation, but Eleanor couldn't bring herself to speak. She felt like she was trapped in a fog of confusion. How had this happened? How could she have lost touch with someone she had cared for so deeply? Someone who had called her mother in her heart, even if they weren't related by blood. The years of silence suddenly felt like an unbearable weight pressing down on her chest. The girl, noticing Eleanor's silence, spoke softly, her voice gentle but filled with emotion. "We know this is a lot to take in," she said, her tone soothing. "But we need you to understand. Our mother, she always remembered you. You were the only person she trusted. And before she died, she told us everything about you. She said you were the one who could help us." Eleanor's heart clenched at the mention of the twins' mother. The thought that this young woman, who had once been in her care, had carried her memory with her all these years was overwhelming. Eleanor had never known what had happened to her. She had assumed that the girl had simply moved on, perhaps to start a family of her own, or to escape the memories of her troubled past. But hearing that she had remembered Eleanor all this time, that she had kept her in her heart, made the pain of their separation even more difficult to bear. The boy, who had been quiet up until now, looked at her with an intensity that matched his sister's. "We don't know why she left," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "But we know she loved you. She didn't want to leave you behind. And when she was gone, she made sure we knew about you, so we could find you." Eleanor's eyes welled with tears. The idea that this young woman, who had been through so much, had wanted to return to her, but had never been able to, was almost too much for her to bear. She reached out and wiped the tears away, trying to compose herself. She had lived a long, lonely life, and the thought that she had lost a daughter, only to find out that this daughter had been thinking of her all along, felt like a cruel twist of fate. "I'm so sorry," Eleanor whispered, her voice breaking. "I never knew. I never even tried to find her. I thought she was gone from my life forever." She paused, looking at the twins, her heart aching. "I had no idea. I wish I had known. I would have never let her go." The girl reached across the table and took Eleanor's hand, her touch warm and comforting. "It's not your fault," she said gently. "She didn't want you to feel the pain of losing her. She didn't want to drag you into her troubles. But we need you now, Eleanor. We need your help. We don't have anyone else." Eleanor swallowed hard, trying to control the lump in her throat. The words were simple, but they carried so much weight. The twins needed her, and despite all the confusion and the pain, Eleanor knew that she couldn't turn them away. She had spent so many years alone, but perhaps now, this was the chance to make things right. She had a second chance to be the person she had once hoped to be for someone else, to be the mother that her foster daughter had never fully known. As the realization sank in, Eleanor looked at the twins, seeing them not just as children who had come from a past she didn't understand, but as a part of her future. She had no idea what they needed or how she could help them, but one thing was clear: her life had changed in a way that she could never have imagined. The past and the future were colliding in ways she couldn't yet comprehend, but she knew, deep down, that she had to help them. She had to try. "Tell me what you need," Eleanor said quietly, her voice steady now, though her heart still felt fragile. "I'll do whatever I can." The twins exchanged a relieved glance, their faces lighting up with hope. Eleanor's world was no longer just her own. It had expanded, filled with the possibility of healing, of redemption, and of the love she had once lost, but was now finding again. Eleanor sat back in her chair, feeling a sense of awe as she looked at the twins. There was so much she didn't understand yet, but one thing was clear. These children were her connection to a past she had long buried, a past filled with moments she had tried to forget, and yet now, it seemed that past had come back to find her in the most unexpected way. As the twins sat there, waiting for her to respond, Eleanor's mind wandered back to the time when she had first taken in their mother. It had been so many years ago, but the memories came rushing back to her. The young girl had been a teenager, troubled and fragile, carrying the weight of a difficult life that had left her scared. Eleanor had been so determined to help her, to offer her a safe place to grow, to become the person she was meant to be. It hadn't been easy. The girl had been quiet at first, withdrawn, unsure of the love Eleanor was offering. But over time, things had changed. They had bonded, shared stories, and found comfort in each other's presence. But then, as suddenly as the girl had come into her life, she had disappeared. Eleanor had searched, contacted everyone she could think of, but no one had known where she went. She had assumed the worst, that the girl had simply given up on the life Eleanor had tried to give her. And for years, that uncertainty had gnawed at her, never allowing her to fully heal. Now, sitting here with these children, she realized how wrong she had been. The girl hadn't just disappeared. She had left, yes, but she had always remembered Eleanor. The realization that the young woman had carried her memory for so many years and that she had entrusted her children to her care was both heartbreaking and beautiful. Eleanor felt a deep ache in her chest. She had wasted so many years wondering what had happened. And now, here they were, asking for her help. "What do you need exactly?" Eleanor asked softly, her voice steady but filled with a sense of uncertainty. She wasn't sure what they were asking of her, but she knew they needed her. She could see it in their eyes. This was more than just a visit. This was something deeper, something more important. The boy, who had been quietly watching Eleanor, spoke up. "We don't really know where to go," he said, his voice tinged with a quiet desperation. "Our mom, she told us we'd be safe with you, that you could help us." He paused, glancing at his sister for reassurance before continuing. "We've been trying to survive on our own, but it's been hard. We don't know what to do next. We've lost everything, and we don't have anyone else." Eleanor felt a pang in her heart as she listened to the boy's words. It was clear that they had been through so much already, and here they were standing in front of her, asking for help. She couldn't deny them. She could feel the weight of their trust, the urgency in their need. For all these years, she had lived in a quiet, empty house, but now, suddenly, it felt full of possibility. The girl, still holding Eleanor's hand, added softly, "We just need a place to stay, somewhere we can be safe. We don't know who else to turn to. We just need you." Eleanor nodded slowly, her mind racing as she tried to figure out what to do. The offer of help was overwhelming. She had never expected anything like this to happen. She had spent so many years alone, but now, it seemed that the universe had brought these children into her life for a reason. They were part of her past, and in some way, they were part of her future. "I'll help you," Eleanor said, her voice steady now, her decision made. "I don't know what all this means yet, but I'll help you. You're not alone anymore." The twins smiled, their faces lighting up with relief. For the first time, Eleanor saw hope in their eyes, hope that had been missing for so long. In that moment, she realized that she wasn't just helping them. They were helping her too. They were filling the empty spaces in her heart that she had thought were beyond repair. As the rain continued to fall outside, Eleanor knew that her life had changed forever. She had found a new purpose, a new reason to live. She wasn't just a lonely woman anymore. She was someone's family, and that meant more than anything she had ever imagined. Eleanor sat quietly at the kitchen table, her thoughts swirling. The twins had shared so much in such a short time, and she still couldn't quite grasp everything. Their mother, her foster daughter, the girl she had once tried so hard to help, had been a part of her life long ago. Eleanor had always thought she was lost forever, that the girl had moved on, leaving her behind. But now, the twins were here, standing in front of her, asking for her help. They had been searching for her for so long, and now they had found her. The boy was the first to break the silence. He had been more quiet than his sister, but now he spoke with a seriousness that caught Eleanor's attention. "We don't have anywhere else to go," he said softly. "Our mom didn't want to leave us. She told us that if anything ever happened to her, we should find you. You were the only one she trusted." Eleanor's heart ached as she listened to his words. To think that this young woman had carried her memory with her all these years and had believed that Eleanor could help them in their time of need. It was both humbling and heartbreaking. The pain of losing contact with the girl she had cared for had always lingered in her heart, but now that pain was mixed with something else. These children, her grandchildren in a way, had come to her for help, and Eleanor felt a fierce need to do whatever she could for them. "Your mother, she was a special girl," Eleanor said, her voice soft with emotion. "She was so strong, even though she had been through so much. I tried to give her a better life, but I never knew what happened to her after she left." The girl, who had been quiet up until now, nodded slowly. "She never forgot you, Eleanor. She always talked about you, about how kind you were to her. We know that she loved you like a mother." Eleanor's eyes welled up with tears. She had always wondered about the girl, about what had happened to her. And now, hearing that she had loved her all these years, filled Eleanor with both sorrow and relief. She had never wanted to lose her, but it seemed like life had pulled them apart. Now these children were here, and it felt like a second chance. The boy looked at her with a mix of hope and uncertainty. "We don't know what to do now. Our mom's gone, and we don't have anyone else. She made us promise we'd find you, that you would take care of us." Eleanor took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had spent so many years in solitude, never imagining that anyone would need her again. But here they were, her past and her future coming together in a way she never expected. She couldn't let them down. They were family, and family meant everything to her. "I'll take care of you," Eleanor said firmly, her voice filled with determination. "You don't have to worry anymore. You have a place here with me. You're not alone." The twins smiled, their faces lighting up with a mixture of relief and gratitude. For the first time since they had arrived, the tension that had lingered in the room seemed to melt away. Eleanor's heart swelled with love for these children, these strangers who had suddenly become such a big part of her life. She had so much to learn about them, about their lives, but one thing was clear. They needed her, and she wasn't going to let them down. As Eleanor watched the twins, she couldn't help but think of their mother. She had been a troubled young woman, but she had also been strong and resilient, traits that seemed to run through her children as well. They had survived on their own, despite everything, and now they had found their way back to her. Eleanor had always wanted a family, but she had never thought it would happen like this. Now it seemed that fate had brought them together, and Eleanor was determined to make the most of this second chance. The storm outside raged on, but inside the house, Eleanor felt a sense of peace settle over her. The house no longer felt empty. It felt full, filled with hope and love that had been missing for far too long. These children, her grandchildren, were now a part of her life. And for the first time in years, Eleanor felt like she had a purpose again. The days that followed felt like a whirlwind to Eleanor. At first, it was hard to believe that this wasn't some dream or a fleeting moment. These children, who had knocked on her door out of nowhere, were now living under her roof. She had gone from years of solitude to suddenly having two young lives to care for, and while the adjustment was overwhelming, it also brought a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. The twins, despite their quiet and reserved nature, had slowly started to settle into her home. The boy, whose name was Jason, was the more withdrawn of the two. He spent most of his time reading or drawing, and though he didn't talk much, Eleanor could tell he had a sharp mind. His sister, Emily, was more open and eager to engage. She asked about Eleanor's past, about the things she liked to do, and always had a question on the tip of her tongue. It was clear that she was trying to piece together the life that had been taken from her and her brother. Eleanor found herself thinking back to her own childhood, to the days when she had been full of hope and dreams of a family. She had never imagined that years later, she would be raising these two children. But now, with them living in her home, she found herself thinking about what their lives had been like before they arrived. How had they survived on their own for so long? What had they been through? The questions weighed on her heart, but she didn't press them. She wanted them to feel safe, to feel like they could trust her before diving into the past they might not be ready to share. One afternoon, as Eleanor was working in the garden, Emily came outside, holding something in her hands. It was an old photograph, slightly worn at the edges, but still clear enough to bring a flood of memories back to Eleanor. The picture was of a much younger version of herself, standing alongside a girl she instantly recognized. The girl who had once been in her care, her foster daughter. The girl had been smiling, a bright, carefree expression on her face. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat as she looked at the photograph. It was the first time she had seen her foster daughter in years, and seeing her now, through the eyes of Emily, was both painful and comforting. "I found this in one of the boxes in the attic," Emily said, her voice soft as she handed it to Eleanor. "It's from when Mom was with you, isn't it?" Eleanor took the photograph carefully, her fingers trembling slightly as she traced the outline of the younger girl's face. "Yes," she said quietly. "That was her. She was so full of life back then." Emily sat down beside her, looking at the photo with a mixture of curiosity and sadness. "She talked about you all the time, you know," Emily said softly. "She said you were the only person who ever truly cared for her, the only one who gave her a chance." Tears welled up in Eleanor's eyes as she listened to Emily's words. She had always wondered what had happened to her foster daughter, but hearing that she had remembered her, that she had spoken of her with love, was both a relief and a heartbreak. Eleanor had spent so many years thinking she had lost that connection, but now it seemed like their bond had never truly broken. It had just been waiting for the right moment to be rediscovered. As the afternoon wore on, Eleanor and the twins sat together in the living room, talking and sharing memories. The conversation flowed more easily now, the walls between them slowly crumbling. Emily told Eleanor stories about their mother, stories she had never shared with anyone else, things Eleanor had never known about the girl she had taken in all those years ago. Jason, too, began to open up, though more slowly. He shared his favorite books, and Eleanor began to see the quiet boy in a new light. He was thoughtful, introspective, and had a deep sense of understanding that made him wise beyond his years. As the days passed, Eleanor found herself becoming more and more invested in their lives. She wanted to know everything about them, their hopes, their fears, their dreams. She wanted to be there for them in a way she had never been able to be for their mother. And slowly, the house began to feel like a home again, filled with the laughter and warmth of the children she never expected to have. One evening, as the three of them sat around the dinner table, Jason looked up at Eleanor, his expression serious but filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for taking us in. We didn't know where else to go." Eleanor smiled, her heart swelling with love. "You're family now," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "And family always takes care of each other." As the twins smiled at her, Eleanor knew that no matter what the future held, she had found something precious, something she had been missing for so long. She had found a second chance to be the family she had always wanted to be, and in doing so, she had healed a part of herself she vowed. The days continued to pass by, and Eleanor found herself becoming more and more attached to the twins. Their presence in her home brought with it a new sense of warmth, one that she hadn't felt in years. There was a new rhythm to her life now, one that revolved around shared meals, evening conversations, and the quiet comfort of knowing she was no longer alone. It was as if the emptiness in her heart had been filled, not just by their company, but by the bond that was growing between them all. Eleanor was amazed at how quickly the twins had begun to adapt to their new life with her. Emily, with her boundless curiosity and eagerness to learn, often asked Eleanor questions about her past, about the things she enjoyed doing, about the little things that made up her life. She would sit by Eleanor's side, flipping through old photo albums or reading books, always asking for more stories, more details. Eleanor found herself enjoying these moments of shared history, seeing the world through Emily's bright eyes. Jason, on the other hand, remained quieter, more introspective. But Eleanor began to see the subtle ways in which he was opening up. He would ask about the things he had found in the attic, about the family photos, and slowly he began to share small details about himself, his favorite quiet places, his love for drawing, his thoughts on the books he read. It was as though the more Eleanor listened, the more he felt comfortable enough to reveal. She understood that for both of them, healing would take time, but the fact that they were willing to try, to trust, meant the world to her. One afternoon, Eleanor decided to take them on a walk through the garden. It had always been her favorite part of the house, a peaceful space where she could sit and reflect. The flowers were in full bloom, and the air was warm, with just a hint of summer. As they walked through the rows of flowers, Emily ran ahead, her laughter echoing in the air. She was so full of life, so eager to embrace the world around her. Jason walked more slowly beside Eleanor, looking at the flowers with quiet interest. "I used to come out here a lot," Eleanor said, her voice soft as she admired the blooming roses. "When I was younger, I planted these. I've always loved being outside, surrounded by nature." Jason nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "It's nice here," he said, his voice calm but sincere. "It feels peaceful." Eleanor smiled at him, grateful for his words. It was a simple statement, but it meant more to her than he could have known. She had always cherished her garden, but now, having the twins by her side, it felt even more special. Later that evening, as they sat down to dinner, Emily looked at Eleanor with a sparkle in her eye. "You know," she said, "it feels like home now, like we're a real family." Eleanor's heart swelled with emotion. She had never expected to hear those words, never thought she would have the chance to feel like a mother again. But here they were, sitting around the table together, and for the first time in so many years, Eleanor felt whole. "I'm glad you're here," she said softly, her voice filled with warmth. "I'm so glad you found me." The twins exchanged a look, and Emily smiled. "We knew you'd be the one to help us," she said, her voice full of certainty. "You always were, even when we didn't know it." Eleanor blinked back tears as she looked at them, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. She hadn't realized how much she had been missing until they came into her life. The past had been filled with uncertainty and loneliness, but now it was filled with love and a sense of belonging. The pain of the years before seemed to fade into the background as she looked at these two children, her family now, who had come to her in their time of need. As the evening wore on, and they sat together talking and laughing, Eleanor felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had been given a second chance to be a part of something beautiful, something real. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt ready to face whatever came her way. She had the love of the twins, and together they would build a new life, one filled with hope, joy, and the strength of family. The rain from the previous days had stopped, and the stars were beginning to twinkle in the night sky. Eleanor, sitting with Jason and Emily, felt a quiet satisfaction. The journey to this moment hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. They had found each other, and in doing so, had created something stronger than just family, something unbreakable. And with that thought, Eleanor finally allowed herself to believe that no matter what challenges the future held, they would face them together as a family.